When a child stands up in silence and the entire system flinches, you know something extraordinary is about to happen. The cabin fell completely silent as 9-year-old Gabriel Carter slowly rose from his first-class seat. His heart was pounding, but his voice was steady. Every pair of eyes turned to him, not with curiosity, but with shock. A child was about to challenge an airline, a flight crew, and a duel. Vanessa Blake, the lead flight attendant, took a sharp breath. She had mocked them, humiliated his mother, threatened to have them detained upon landing. But now the boy she underestimated was calmly listing violations of federal law with surgical precision: Civil Rights Act, Air Carrier Access Act, precedent cases, all from memory. What they saw was a child. What they were facing was a legal mind sharpened by injustice. Gabriel had not planned to speak, but when his mother, Dr. Renee Carter, a heart surgeon on a life-or-death mission, was targeted, he could no longer stay quiet. This was no tantrum. This was a reckoning. And the boy in aisle 3B had just become the most dangerous passenger on board. It was raining the night Marcus Carter died. Not the kind of soft, forgiving rain that soothes. No, this was a hard, unapologetic storm, like the sky itself was furious. Thunder cracked over the city of Atlanta as 9-year-old Gabriel stood in the hospital hallway, gripping his mother's hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. Down the corridor, police officers whispered to each other, avoiding eye contact. One of them looked like he wanted to say something, but did not. His mother, Dr. Renee Carter, stood silent, her scrubs still soaked from the emergency room. Her fingers trembled, but her back remained straight. She had just lost her husband. But more than that, she had just lost faith in the system. Marcus Carter had been a social worker, a community organizer, a man who believed change came not from shouting louder, but from standing longer. He had marched peacefully that afternoon, holding signs chanting for justice. By nightfall, he was in a jail cell. By midnight, he was gone. They said it was a heart attack. They also said the body camera footage could not be retrieved. Gabriel did not speak. He simply looked up at the blinking fluorescent lights and made a decision no child should ever have to make. If the law would not protect his father, he would learn the law and protect others. That was the moment everything changed. In the weeks that followed, Gabriel became a quiet observer. While other kids played video games, he read legal textbooks. He memorized the Bill of Rights. He watched courtroom documentaries like other kids watch cartoons. His mind became a vault of statutes, case law, and constitutional arguments. And his heart, once shattered, began to take shape again, this time made of steel. His mother noticed, of course. "Sweetheart," she said gently one evening, folding her scrubs, "most kids your age are building tree houses, not memorizing the Civil Rights Act." Gabriel looked up from his book. "Tree houses won't save lives." Renee's heart cracked again. Not from grief this time, but from awe. She saw her late husband in Gabriel's calm defiance, his quiet brilliance. And though she wished he could just be a child, part of her knew he never really had that chance. The two became closer than ever. Every morning before school, Gabriel quizzed her on legal vocabulary while she reviewed surgical diagrams. Every evening, she taught him how to control his emotions under pressure, how to stay calm when the world tried to provoke him. Her lessons in medicine, his in law. A quiet alliance of intellect and survival. They were a team. And though Renee had endured years of microaggressions and professional roadblocks as one of the only Black female cardiothoracic surgeons in the Southeast, she always told her son the same thing: document everything. Stay focused. Fight smart. Some battles you walk away from, but others you walk straight into. Gabriel listened. He memorized. He waited. He did not know when the next battle would come. But when it did, he would be ready. And that battle would come 6 months later on Flight 378. The terminal buzzed with pre-dawn energy as Gabriel Carter and his mother, Dr. Renee Carter, hurried through Atlanta International Airport. Gate B-17 was boarding in 20 minutes, and every second mattered. Renee's heart was already in Boston in an operating room she had not yet reached, with a 10-year-old girl whose chest cavity would be open on the table, waiting for hands steady enough to fix a defect only a few surgeons in the country had ever attempted to repair. Gabriel kept pace beside her, pulling a small suitcase in one hand, a thick legal pad clutched in the other. "Mom," he said between breaths, "define tort law again." Renee smiled despite herself shaking her head. "Civil wrongs that cause someone to suffer harm or loss," she answered, adjusting her bag. Liability goes to the person who commits the action. Correct, Gabriel nodded, flipping the page. Also includes negligence, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. You are truly not normal, Renee muttered affectionately. As they moved through security, Renee handed over her medical credentials. A white male doctor behind them flashed his badge casually and breezed through. Renee, however, was asked to step aside. Again, her ID was scrutinized, her bag inspected twice, and even her stethoscope examined like a weapon. Gabriel said nothing, but he watched everything, his eyes sharp, his memory sharper. These things were never said aloud. No one would call them racist to your face, but the tone, the hesitation, the excessive checking, it was always there. His mother had taught him how to recognize the quiet ways the world tried to remind them they did not belong. Boarding began. Renee had purchased 2 first-class seats, not out of luxury, but necessity. She needed sleep, stillness, and space to prepare for surgery. The moment they stepped into the and Gabriel felt it. The glances, the stiffness, the subtle shift in tone. They made their way to row 3. Renee sat by the window. Gabriel took the aisle. Across from them, 2 white businessmen in matching suits paused their conversation to exchange a glance. One raised an eyebrow. The other leaned back and folded his arms as if silently assessing whether they belonged in that section of the aircraft. And then she appeared, Vanessa Blake. Her smile was effortless when she greeted the passengers behind them. Welcome aboard, Mr. Harris. Champagne or sparkling water? Her tone was velvet, but when she reached Renee and Gabriel, her posture straightened, her smile stiffened. Excuse me, she said, glancing at them as if unsure. Are you certain these are your seats? Renee remained composed. Yes, she replied, reaching calmly for her purse. First class 3A and 3B. I have the boarding passes here. No need, Vanessa said, cutting her off before she could hand them over. I was just checking. She walked away, leaving the warm towels and drinks untouched on their tray tables. Gabriel noticed every word, every glance, every deliberate omission. He squeezed his mother's hand once. She squeezed back 3 times. Their code, I love you, I see you, I've got you. Vanessa continued her rounds, doting on the elderly white couple behind them, pouring their drinks with 2 hands, and a laugh that rang false but practiced. Gabriel opened his legal pad. He began to take notes. Passenger treatment discrepancy. Lack of service consistency. Boarding verification protocol applied selectively. He labeled the page Observations Flight 378. As the plane began to taxi, Renee's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and immediately answered. Dr. Carter speaking, she said quietly. Gabriel could hear the urgency in the voice on the other end, even without speakerphone. The surgical team in Boston was updating her. Ava Morales' heart rate was unstable. Her oxygen saturation had dropped. They were preparing the child for emergency induction, but they could not proceed without Renee. She pulled out her notepad and began scribbling. Orders, instructions, procedure, reminders. Gabriel leaned closer but said nothing. He had learned to observe first. Always observe. Vanessa, however, returned. Ma'am, she said curtly, you'll need to end that call immediately. We are preparing for takeoff. Renee looked up calm but firm. This is a medical emergency. I will be off within 30 seconds. Vanessa's voice rose just slightly. We follow FAA protocol. No exceptions. The businessman across the aisle was still casually texting. Renee ended the call, gracefully apologizing. Vanessa turned without acknowledgement. Gabriel tightened his grip on the pen. So it began. The plane lifted off the tarmac with a low rumble, climbing steadily into the pale blue morning sky. Atlanta shrank beneath the clouds, but inside the cabin, the tension only grew sharper. Gabriel Carter sat upright in his seat, legal pad, open pen ready. To any casual observer, he looked like a curious, well-mannered child, maybe writing a story or doodling out of boredom. But Gabriel was recording, not drawings, not fantasies, evidence. The seatbelt sign turned off with a familiar ding, and Vanessa Blake reemerged from the galley. She moved fluidly through the first-class cabin, tray in hand, her charm returning in waves, just not in their direction. Would you prefer orange juice or mimosa, Mr. Bahamamu? Blatant, she asked the man in 2A, her voice dipped in sweetness. When she reached row 3, her tray was suddenly empty. Oh, she said flatly, glancing at Renee and Gabriel. I seem to be out. I will return shortly. She did not return. Instead, she began chatting with the couple in 4A and 4B about travel plans and tennis tournaments in Florida. Renee sat still, her fingers interlaced on her lap, her medical notes already rewritten after Vanessa had earlier knocked water over her files, a moment that still pulsed in Gabriel's memory. Vanessa had apologized, but her tone lacked sincerity, her actions careless. No offer of help, no replacement towels, just a smile that felt like glass, cold, reflective, and dangerously fragile. Gabriel scribbled silently: beverage denial, unequal service delivery, selective courtesy, pattern forming, intentionality probable. He paused to underline that last phrase, intentionality probable, because this was no longer passive ignorance. It was an unfolding pattern, and it was not over. An hour into the flight, turbulence rocked the plane gently. The seatbelt sign blinked back on. Vanessa used the moment to walk through and check passengers. When she reached Dr. Carter, she yanked her seatbelt tighter without warning. "It needs to be more secure," she muttered. Renee winced, caught off guard by the roughness of the action. Across the aisle, the man in 3C had his belt loose, nearly unfastened. Vanessa gave him a warm smile and walked right past. Gabriel's pen moved swiftly across the page. Inconsistent enforcement, physical interaction without consent, disparate treatment by race and gender. His handwriting was precise. His heart was not. It ached, because this was his mother. This was the woman who had spent her life saving others, working longer hours than anyone else in her hospital, rising above microaggressions and unfair pay and tokenism, only to be treated like she did not belong, like she was a threat, and it was happening again. He glanced at her. Renee caught his eye and gave him a soft, steady look. Her expression said, "Not yet. Choose your moment. I'm okay." But Gabriel could see the effort it took for her to hold that line. Half an hour later, the turbulence cleared. The sign turned off. Renee unbuckled and quietly stood up to use the lavatory. She had been seated for hours, and like several passengers before her, she needed a break. She barely took a step before Vanessa was there, intercepting her like a wall. "Ma'am," she said sharply, "you need to return to your seat immediately. We are expecting more turbulence." Renee glanced at the monitor. The flight path showed clear skies ahead. Her voice remained calm. "But the seatbelt sign is off, and I saw at least 3 people return from the restroom in the last 10 minutes. Vanessa's face hardened. "That may be so, but I am asking you to sit down." At that exact moment, a white passenger in business class stood and made his way toward the lavatory. Vanessa did not stop him. In fact, she pulled the curtain aside to let him pass more easily. Renee returned to her seat without protest. But Gabriel, he wrote, fast, selective restriction of movement, pretextual authority, differential enforcement, visual proof available. He bit his lip. His fingers trembled, not out of fear, but from something deeper. Fury refined. He wanted to speak. He wanted to rise and call it out. All of it. The silence, the double standards, the way they were being degraded, one small cut at a time. But his mother's words came back to him. "Pick your battles. Not every fight is worth the war." So he waited, and then he heard it, a voice behind them, low but clear. "They always make it about race," a woman whispered to her husband. "Maybe if they behaved better, people wouldn't treat them like that." Gabriel froze. It was not just Vanessa. It was the way prejudice crept from seat to seat, from smiles to silence, from body language to boarding passes. It was systemic, and it was patient, always waiting for the moment you were too tired to resist. Renee closed her eyes for just a second, inhaled deeply, and let it go. But Gabriel, he inhaled too, not to let go, to remember, to record, because he knew the moment was coming. And when it did, he would not simply speak, he would change everything. The captain's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a medical professional on board, please notify the flight crew immediately. We have a passenger experiencing chest discomfort and difficulty breathing." The entire cabin tensed. Renee Carter's instincts activated before the announcement even finished. She pressed the call button and stood up, reaching for her medical bag with steady hands. "I am a cardiothoracic surgeon." She told the nearest flight attendant, a younger man named Jeremy, who had stayed mostly silent throughout the flight. "I need to examine the passenger immediately." Jeremy nodded, but before he could say a word, Vanessa appeared again. "We've already found someone," she said coolly. "Please return to your seat." Renee blinked. "I am the only cardiothoracic surgeon on this aircraft. You need my help." Vanessa crossed her arms. "How do we even know you are really a doctor?" That sentence hit harder than turbulence ever could. The accusation was not about credentials. It was about who she was. Gabriel's breath caught in his chest. He had heard that tone before. He had seen what happened when his mother's competence was questioned, not because of her training, but because of her skin. Before Renee could respond, Jeremy looked visibly conflicted. We could use her help. The man is pale and he's sweating heavily. Vanessa rolled her eyes and walked away. Renee grabbed her stethoscope and followed Jeremy into economy class, where an older man, Mr. Gregory Mendez, clutched his chest and gasped for air. She moved with expert speed. Oxygen mask now, she said. He's having a probable arrhythmia. We need aspirin, and to notify the pilot diversion may be necessary if symptoms worsen. Within minutes, Mr. Mendez's breathing began to stabilize. Color returned to his face. He looked up at Renee, blinking through tears. You saved my life, he whispered. Renee gave him a warm, exhausted smile, but the moment of triumph did not last long. When she returned to her seat, Vanessa was waiting. You had no authorization to treat that passenger, she hissed under her breath. You could have put the entire flight at risk. Gabriel felt heat rise behind his eyes. You mean she saved a man's life? He said calmly. Vanessa ignored him. Security will be meeting this flight upon arrival. Your behavior has been disruptive and possibly dangerous. That was it. That was the line that turned silence into resolve. Gabriel opened his backpack. His hands did not tremble. His voice did not shake. From a side pouch, he pulled out a folder carefully labeled, timestamp documented. He stood up facing the aisle, and this time he did not wait for permission. Excuse me, Gabriel said loud enough for row 1 to row 6 to hear, but I need to speak on behalf of my mother and to protect the life she just saved. Vanessa turned her face twisting. Sit down, young man. This is not your concern. Gabriel did not move. Under the fluorescent lights of that pressurized cabin with dozens of strangers watching, he took a breath and spoke not as a boy, but as a witness. As of this moment, Gabriel said clearly, I have documented 14 separate acts of discriminatory behavior. Selective enforcement, denial of basic service, obstruction of medical care, and unlawful interference with protected communication. The passengers went silent. Jeremy stepped back. Renee looked up at her son, stunned. Vanessa tried to interrupt, but Gabriel continued, his voice steady, powerful. This is not about attitude. This is not about airline protocol. This is about a pattern of targeted bias that has placed lives at risk. He raised his legal pad. I can cite chapter and verse. A murmur spread across the cabin. From 2B, a woman stood slowly. I've seen it, she said. Every word he just said had happened. A second man raised his phone. I recorded it. Vanessa's mouth opened, but nothing came out. And that was when the boy in 3B made the cabin forget their altitude entirely, because knowledge had spoken, and now justice was airborne. The cabin of Flight 378 was no longer just a pressurized metal tube. It had become a courtroom suspended at 35,000 feet. And Gabriel Carter, 9 years old, stood at its center like a boy born for the bench. Passengers leaned into the aisle's phones, silently recording. Some were still stunned. Others looked expectant, like they were watching something they could not quite believe, but did not want to miss. Vanessa Blake stood frozen, her face pale but defiant. And across from her, Gabriel turned one page forward in his legal pad and began. Under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, he said calmly, no person in the United States shall on the ground of race, color, or national origin be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. This includes public transportation. He paused not for effect, but for clarity. This aircraft is operated by Titan Air, a commercial airline that falls under federal jurisdiction. What my mother and I have experienced today constitutes a direct violation of these protections. Gasps rippled through the cabin. No theatrics, just law. Gabriel continued, flipping his pad to the next page. Additionally, the Air Carrier Access Act of 1986 prohibits discrimination against passengers with disabilities or those providing medical services, denying my mother's access to her own medical equipment, obstructing her from communicating with the hospital regarding a critical surgery, and confiscating her phone were unlawful. Vanessa laughed under her breath, desperate to regain control. Are we really going to let a child lecture the crew on aviation law? She scoffed. That was when a voice spoke from behind them. "You absolutely are," said a tall woman in a slate gray blazer as she stood slowly. Her voice was calm, commanding every word laced with gravitas. "I am Professor Eleanor Lynn, Chair of Aviation and Civil Rights Law at Harvard. And everything this boy has said so far is legally sound, shockingly so." The plane seemed to tilt on its axis, not physically, but morally. Gabriel bowed his head slightly to her in acknowledgement. Then he turned toward the rest of the cabin. "My grandfather was a civil rights attorney," he said, his voice lower now, more personal. "He told me the most powerful weapon against injustice was not anger. It was information, law, truth, and knowing exactly when to speak it." He pointed gently to his mother. She was on her way to save a child's life. She still is. But instead of being supported as a doctor, she was treated like a criminal, like her credentials were a lie, like she did not belong in this cabin. "I know what that feels like, and I know what it's called." He looked at Vanessa. "It's called discrimination." More passengers began to murmur agreement. One man in a business suit raised his hand like he was in court. "Everything he's saying matches what I saw." Vanessa's voice cracked. "This is a security matter now. The boy has been recording. That's a federal offense." Gabriel shook his head calmly. "I have not recorded video. I have taken notes, which is permitted by your airline's own customer conduct policy under Section 4, Personal Documentation of In-Flight Service. I downloaded the terms before boarding." He turned back to the passengers. "I did not want to be the center of this flight. I just wanted to get my mom to Boston in time. But when someone tries to take your rights quietly cut by cut, sometimes the only way to fight back is to speak so clearly, even silence has to listen." The entire front of the aircraft was still. Even the flight attendant from earlier, Jeremy, stepped forward and spoke. "He's right," he said. "I saw it. All of it. I didn't say anything at first, Roast, and I regret that, but I won't stay silent now." That broke the dam. Passengers stood up one by one like a jury delivering a collective verdict. Professor Lynn stepped beside Gabriel. "If this flight ends with security removing Dr. Carter and her son, I will testify under oath that discrimination occurred, and I will personally assist with litigation." Vanessa looked stunned now, visibly retreating behind professionalism that had cracked wide open. And then, as if on cue, the captain emerged from the cockpit. Captain Bradley Stanton had flown through storms, near collisions, and international emergencies. But never in his 25-year career had he seen a scene like this. He scanned the aisle. He looked at Gabriel. He looked at Renee, and then at Vanessa. "What's going on here?" he asked quietly. Before anyone else could speak, Gabriel stepped forward one last time. "Captain," he said clearly, "my name is Gabriel Carter. I am 9 years old. My mother is Dr. Renee Carter, a cardiothoracic surgeon. She was en route to Boston Children's Hospital to save a 10-year-old girl's life. She has been denied dignity, questioned, and blocked from helping another passenger in distress. And now she has been threatened with arrest. I have documented everything." He handed the captain a copy of his notes. The folder was meticulously organized, timed, cross-referenced, bullet-pointed. Captain Stanton flipped through the pages. His jaw clenched. He said nothing. But when he turned to Vanessa, there was no uncertainty left in his voice. "Return Dr. Carter's phone," he said, "immediately, and clear a path for her when we land." Vanessa did not move. Professor Lynn added, "Refusal to comply may be viewed as obstruction." Vanessa's hands shook as she handed the phone back. And just like that, Gabriel sat back down. Not with pride, not with arrogance, but with calm, because the moment had come, and the law had spoken. For the first time since Flight 378 left Atlanta, Dr. Renee Carter exhaled. Not because the air had changed, but because something else had the momentum. The cabin no longer hummed with quiet tension. Instead, it vibrated with something else entirely: recognition. Passengers had seen what happened. They had heard Gabriel speak, and they could no longer pretend it was just a misunderstanding. What began as silence was now becoming solidarity. A man in his early 50s stood up from row 5. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "My name is Marcus Feldman. I am an attorney with the ACLU," he said. "This case is textbook discrimination. The documentation, the video, evidence, the pattern of service denial, it's all there." He turned to Gabriel. "Young man, your legal citations were impeccable. Gabriel gave a respectful nod, his voice soft. Thank you, sir. Behind him, an elderly woman slowly rose. Her voice cracked with age but rang with moral clarity. I've been watching since they boarded, she said, and I've been watching this kind of thing happen for 70 years. That woman, she pointed at Vanessa, has no business treating people the way she did. And I will say so under oath if needed. Her name, she later revealed, was Mrs. Eleanor Blakely, a retired civil rights journalist who had marched with Dr. King. Next, a young woman no older than 25 stood up from row 6. I'm a med student. I've seen how black female physicians are constantly second-guessed. I saw what happened here, and I want to help however I can. More hands went up. More voices joined in. A tech executive in 1A, a teacher from North Carolina in 2B, a mother traveling with her teenage daughter in row 4, who whispered, "You're not alone," as she handed Dr. Carter a bottle of water Vanessa never brought. Even Jeremy, the quiet flight attendant, stepped forward. I should have spoken up sooner, he admitted, facing Renee directly. I saw what was happening. I was afraid to challenge protocol, but protocol never felt so wrong. Then came the final voice that shifted everything. From the far end of the cabin, a man in a navy blazer stood and slowly walked forward. His voice was calm, deliberate, but carried the weight of someone used to being listened to. I'm Dr. William Joe, he said, Chief of Surgery at Boston Children's Hospital. Dr. Carter is flying in today at my personal request. She is the only surgeon in the region qualified to perform the rare procedure needed to save a 10-year-old patient waiting in our OR. That patient is prepped and on the verge of cardiac collapse. He looked around the cabin slowly. If Dr. Carter does not arrive, we may lose her. That child has hours, maybe less. A gasp escaped from somewhere in the back. The emotional gravity finally landed. Now the situation was no longer just about mistreatment. It was about a life, a real innocent life, hanging in the balance. Captain Stanton stepped forward again, face taut with responsibility. Dr. Joe, thank you for the information, he said. I will notify the ground crew to expedite her deplaning upon arrival, and I will file a captain's report of the events witnessed on board. Vanessa said nothing. Her eyes darted toward the back of the aircraft, searching for escape in the middle of accountability. But Gabriel, he simply sat still, composed, resolved. Because for the first time, the system wasn't just reacting. It was correcting itself. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged again as the nose of Flight 378 gently tilted downward. They had begun their final descent into Boston. Through the small oval window, the skyline came into view, glittering beneath a pale winter sun. But inside the aircraft, the atmosphere remained electric quiet, yes, but charged. Like everyone was holding their breath. Gabriel Carter sat upright, tablet in one hand, folder in the other. His heart pounded not from fear, but from readiness. He knew this was not over. The air war had been won, but the ground was a different battlefield. Vanessa had already made her move, radioing ahead to alert the security that disruptive passengers would need to be removed. Gabriel had overheard her whisper it, venom cloaked in protocol. Let security sort them out. Let them miss the surgery. Let them explain it under handcuffs. She still thought she could twist the ending, but Gabriel was ready. Across the aisle, Renee Carter remained composed. Her posture was calm, her voice silent, but her fingers tapped rhythmically against her armrest. She was calculating time. Ava Morales, her 10-year-old patient, was likely sedated by now. She needed to be in that operating room within the hour. Time was not emotional. Time was mathematical, and the math was getting dangerous. Captain Stanton's voice came over the speaker, calm and measured. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing shortly at Boston Logan International Airport. For safety reasons, we ask that all passengers remain seated after landing until further notice. We have a medical priority situation on board and will need to allow one passenger to deplane first. Thank you for your cooperation. A ripple of murmurs spread. Gabriel looked at his mother. That's for you, he whispered. Renee gave him a faint smile. That's for us. But then Gabriel saw it. Through the window on the jet bridge, 4 uniformed officers stood waiting. Security, 2 in airport police uniforms, 2 in black tactical jackets with yellow letters across their chests. No smiles, no warmth, just procedure. Vanessa turned and caught Gabriel watching them. She smirked. Checkmate, she thought. But Gabriel did not blink. Mom, he said softly, do you trust me? Renee turned. With my life. Gabriel reached for his folder. Good, because I am going to use everything I have. The wheels touched down. The reverse thrusters roared. The aircraft rolled smoothly to a stop at the gate. But in that moment, every passenger felt the weight of what was waiting not just outside the plane, but outside the comfort of silence. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Captain Stanton reappeared at the front of the cabin. Dr. Carter, he said with professional gravity, please proceed to the front. Renee stood. So did Gabriel. Vanessa stepped into the aisle, blocking their path. Security will escort you, she said with a controlled smile. Standard protocol. But Gabriel stepped forward slightly ahead of his mother. Then let us be clear about that protocol, he said. Because what happens next is either a lawful escort of a medical professional to save a child's life, or the obstruction of that effort under false pretenses. Either way, it is about to be witnessed. Passengers began to raise their phones again. Professor Lin stood and took a step forward, arms crossed. Joe moved closer, speaking into his phone. Standby OR, ETA. Unclear. Vanessa turned sharply to face the 4 officers waiting just beyond the door. They're the ones, she said quickly. The boy has been recording. The mother disrupted the flight. They refused to obey crew instructions. The lead officer, Sergeant Henry Calloway, raised one eyebrow. Is that so, he said. Then he turned to Gabriel. Young man, do you have anything to say before we proceed? Gabriel took a breath and stepped into the jet bridge. The jet bridge felt colder than it should have. Gabriel Carter stepped onto the gray metal ramp with his mother just behind him. 4 security officers stood at the end of the bridge like a wall. Their faces were unreadable, their posture rigid. The lead officer, Sergeant Henry Calloway, had a clipboard in hand and a voice built for control. Durand Renee Carter, he said flatly, we need to ask you and your son to step aside for questioning. We've received reports of disruptive behavior and a possible safety concern. Renee stopped. Her breath was steady, but her eyes flickered to Gabriel. She was ready to surrender for the sake of survival. But Gabriel, he stepped forward. Sir, he said clearly, I believe you've been given incomplete or deliberately false information. Calloway's eyebrows rose slightly. This is official airport business, son. We'll handle this. Gabriel did not flinch. You may handle it, he said, but you will do so with accurate context. I am prepared to provide a fully documented record of the events on Flight 378, including timestamped witness statements, video, documentation, and legal precedent, confirming that both your protocol and the federal protections my mother is entitled to have already been violated. Behind him, passengers were filing into the jet bridge, many of them intentionally slowing down, watching recording. Gabriel unzipped his backpack and pulled out the folder again. This contains a chronological list of discriminatory actions performed by a crew member on board, supported by multiple eyewitnesses. The Air Carrier Access Act, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act are all relevant here. Sergeant Calloway hesitated. Renee gently placed a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. Let them handle it, sweetheart. But Gabriel's voice sharpened. If we let them handle it the way they were told, Mom, you will miss that surgery, and that little girl will die. There was silence, heavy, undeniable. From the shadows behind the jet bridge, another man stepped forward. His face was familiar. Air Marshal Daniel Reyes, he said calmly, showing his badge. I have been monitoring the situation since takeoff. Every officer turned toward him, and there is no security threat here, Reyes said firmly. What I did witness, however, was targeted mistreatment, inappropriate staff conduct, and false radio reports being made by crew to influence ground response. He looked at Vanessa, who had emerged behind the passengers, her expression unreadable. She made the call, he added. Gasps erupted behind them. One of the officers whispered to Calloway. The sergeant looked back at Gabriel, then at Renee. Is there a medical emergency waiting for you? Yes, Renee said. Her voice no longer asked for permission. A 10-year-old girl is prepped for cardiac surgery. I am the only qualified surgeon on the East Coast for the procedure. She is in critical condition. Just then, a flurry of movement burst into the jet bridge. 2 EMTs appeared, followed by a uniformed police officer and a woman in a Boston Children's Hospital jacket. Dr. Carter, she called. We were told you might be delayed. We've brought transport. The surgical team is on standby. Renee stepped forward. I need 10 minutes to scrub and 4 to review the final scan. I can be ready in 15. The hospital official nodded. Then let's move. But Vanessa was not finished. She stepped forward, voice sharp. I want this on record. That child, she pointed at Gabriel, has been undermining crew authority, recording, interfering, intimidating. Sergeant Calloway held up a hand. I've heard enough. He looked at Gabriel one last time. Oh, son, do you have anything else to say before we clear your mother to leave? Gabriel met his eyes without blinking. Yes, sir. I do. He took one breath, then said for all to hear, justice is not about who shouts the loudest. It is about who documents the truth, who shows up when it counts, and who refuses to let power silence what is right. The words hung in the air. Then Sergeant Calloway turned to his team. Clear them, now. Renee was escorted swiftly into the waiting ambulance. As the doors closed, Gabriel turned to Vanessa. His voice was steady but ice cold. You tried to stop my mother from saving a child's life, and you nearly succeeded. Then he turned away, climbed into the back of the ambulance, and never looked back. The operating room lights reflected sharply off stainless steel. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm. Inside Boston Children's Hospital, Renee Carter stood over the open chest of 10-year-old Ava Morales, her hands moving with precision that came not just from training, but from urgency. She had made it. 15 minutes after stepping out of the ambulance, she was scrubbed-gloved and directing the surgical team like a general at war. A war not just against failing anatomy, but against every delay, every insult, every ounce of prejudice that had tried to block this moment. Outside the glass observation room above the OR, Gabriel stood silently. His clothes were wrinkled from travel, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but he never blinked. Not once. He watched his mother maneuver through the most complex operation of her life as if it were an act of defiance. And in many ways it was. It took 6 hours, 6 long hours of calculated risk, micro-movements in fragile vessels. When it was done, Renee removed her gloves and finally allowed herself to breathe. She will live, she said to the team. And when she looked up toward the observation window, her son was still there watching, unmoved, unbroken. But while Renee fought in the OR, the real-world impact of what happened aboard Flight 378 was erupting like wildfire. By the time the surgery ended, the first passenger video had already reached 2 million views. 9-year-old legal prodigy dismantles airline discrimination in real time. The boy who knew the law better than the airline. Doctor denied child. Almost died, but a kid spoke up. Hashtags began trending. Let her operate. Justice on Flight 378. Gabriel Carter. Titan. Air Crisis News networks picked it up by afternoon. Every major outlet, clips of Gabriel citing federal law mid-flight, audio of him saying justice is not about who shouts the loudest, voiceovers from legal experts confirming his accuracy. Civil rights organizations immediately issued statements. That same evening, Titan Air's executive board was forced into an emergency press conference. The CEO, flushed and visibly shaken, stood behind the podium. What happened aboard Flight 378 is unacceptable, she read carefully. Titan Air maintains a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. The actions of our crew member violated both our company's values and federal guidelines. The employee in question has been placed on permanent administrative leave pending federal review. But that was not enough, because Gabriel Carter had done more than expose one woman's bias. He had exposed the silence of a system. Passengers began coming forward with their own stories. Doctors, parents, students, pilots, gate agents from all over the country. The story of Gabriel and Renee Carter became something else entirely, a mirror. And people were tired of what they saw, staring back. 2 days later, the Carter family received a formal apology from the Titan Air Board. Not just a press statement, but a meeting, face-to-face. Renee sat across the long, polished conference table in a tailored blazer. Gabriel sat beside her in a navy sweater, holding a printed binder of reformist suggestions he had written himself. The CEO leaned forward, hands folded tightly. We want to begin by saying how sorry we are, she said, not just for what happened to you, but for the culture that allowed it. Renee nodded once. What happened was not personal, it was systemic. Gabriel opened his binder. I have proposed 6 internal policy changes, he said, sliding the document forward, including the creation of an independent review board, passenger-side reporting, access mandatory anti-bias training based on real-world case studies and transparency logs for crew behavior complaints. Silence. Then you wrote all this. Yes, ma'am, I began drafting it the day after we landed. By the end of the meeting, Titan Air had committed to all 6 reforms. They also provided lifetime first-class travel for the Carter family and offered a significant settlement, which Renee immediately designated to establish a scholarship fund for underrepresented students pursuing careers in medicine and law. But Gabriel's mind was already elsewhere. He had seen something, felt something, a shift, and he knew it was not just about him anymore, which is why 1 week later, the world met his next move. A clean website, a powerful name, a simple mission. Young justice advocates educating the next generation on their rights, because justice begins with knowing. It began with videos, short explainers. What to do if you're treated unfairly at school. Understanding your rights during a traffic stop. How to speak up without escalating. Within 3 weeks, his channel had 1 million subscribers. Within 6 months, school districts were reaching out to integrate his materials into their curriculum. He turned down every TV interview that wanted to make him famous. He did not want fame. He wanted a different future. 6 months later, the Capitol Rotunda echoed with the soft footsteps of suited officials, journalists, and aides as they filed into the congressional hearing room. Seated at the witness table, a small figure adjusted the microphone upward. His feet did not touch the ground. His suit was slightly too big, his tie meticulously tied by his mother that morning. His legal pad rested neatly beside his tablet. Gabriel Carter, age 9, was about to testify before the United States House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. It was not a court of law, but it was something more powerful, a chance to change one. The room fell silent as the chair banged the gavel. You may proceed with your statement, she said with a softness she rarely used. Gabriel took a deep breath. My name is Gabriel Carter, he began. 6 months ago, I was just a kid on a plane. I was trying to help my mom get to a hospital in time to save a 10-year-old girl's life. But because of who we are and how we look, we were treated differently unfairly. That treatment almost cost that little girl her life. He looked up directly at the committee members. But this isn't just about my flight. It's about every flight, every school, every office, every moment when someone gets overlooked, ignored, or blocked because of prejudice pretending to be policy. Gasps, nods, the scribble of pens. Gabriel continued, I am not here to shame the system. I am here to repair it. That is why I started Young Justice Advocates. Because kids like me, kids who look like me, deserve to know their rights. Not just when something goes wrong, but before it ever does. He listed his recommendations clearly. Federal anti-bias standards for airlines, passenger bill of rights printed on every boarding pass, mandatory recording of onboard civil complaints, real-time review boards with passenger representation. When he finished, the room was still. The chair leaned forward and said softly, Mr. Carter, I have been in this seat for 27 years. I have heard testimony from generals, attorneys, CEOs. But you reminded us why we even have these hearings. That quote would be replayed that evening across every major news outlet. Later that afternoon, Gabriel walked outside into the Washington spring sunlight. A small crowd had gathered supporters, students, reporters. But one group stood out, a class of inner-city middle schoolers from Baltimore. One girl, maybe 10 or 11, stepped forward. You're the reason I told my teacher what happened last month. She said, her voice shaky but proud. They made fun of me for being the only girl in robotics. But I told them I knew my rights. Because I saw you, you made them listen. Gabriel looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. Then you don't need me anymore, he said. You've already got what matters. That night, Renee Carter tucked her son into bed at their small apartment outside Boston. The surgery that had once nearly been delayed had not only saved a life, it had started a movement. You okay? She asked him gently. Gabriel looked up at the ceiling, thoughtful. I'm just thinking, he said, about all the kids who never get to speak. I want to reach them. You already are, he turned toward her. Do you think Dad would be proud? Renee's eyes shimmered. Your father didn't raise a son who made noise, she whispered. He raised a son who made change. Gabriel nodded, closed his eyes, and drifted into sleep. The next morning, the world woke to a headline splashed across every major news site, the boy who changed the rules of the sky. And just beneath it, a quote, justice doesn't belong to adults. It belongs to anyone brave enough to demand it. Gabriel Carter. Age injustice doesn't always strike like thunder. Sometimes it comes silently in a refused drink, a suppressed smile, a convenient rule misapplied. But so does resistance. This story is a reminder that power doesn't always wear a uniform, a title, or a badge. Sometimes it carries a backpack and a notebook and knows the law better than those paid to enforce it. So learn your rights. Teach them to your children. And when the time comes, speak up, not with anger, but with clarity. Because when the truth is spoken calmly and fearlessly, even the most powerful systems have no choice but to listen. Have you ever witnessed injustice and wondered what to do? Comment below with a 1 if you believe knowledge is the key, or 2 if you think courage changes the world. Save this video if it moves you and share it with someone who needs to remember what a voice can do. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about everyday heroes turning quiet moments into world-changing change. Because the fight for justice doesn't start when you're old enough. It starts when you care enough.